The blue binder. They buried my husband on a gray Thursday morning, and before the dirt had even settled, his mother leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume over the flowers and whispered, "That house belongs to my family now." I was still holding the folded flag against my chest. Colonel James Whitmore, retired United States Army, had been laid to rest with more honor than most people receive in a lifetime. 22 years of marriage ended with a rifle salute and a flag pressed into my hands by a young soldier whose voice cracked as he said, "On behalf of a grateful nation." James would have hated a scene, so when his mother, Margaret Whitmore, stepped beside me in her cream coat, dry-eyed, I didn't flinch. "Diane," she said softly, "we need to be practical now. That house belongs to my family, so does the company. James would have wanted his bloodline protected." Nobody else heard her. I tightened my grip on the flag and said, "Not today, Margaret." She smiled like she'd already won. That night, my attorney, Richard Hale, sat across from me with a folder full of warnings. "Margaret's already contacted probate counsel," he said. "You have every right to fight this. The house, Whitmore Precision, the accounts." I looked at James's empty recliner and said, "Let her have it." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "I don't feel calm," I admitted. "I just don't want to fight the way she wants me to." The truth was simpler and messier than strategy. I miss my husband, and grief doesn't leave room for battle plans. Word spread fast along the Georgia coast. By the following week, Margaret had already told half the family that I knew I couldn't win, that James's bloodline came first, that I no longer counted as family after 22 years. My neighbor Nancy brought over a peach cobbler and just sat with me in silence, which said more than any advice could. Meanwhile, Margaret parked a real estate agent outside my house, measuring the porch and the flower beds James had planted with his own hands. "I'll probably tear all this out," she told me, not even looking up. "I'm sure you do," I said, and walked away. She seemed almost disappointed that I hadn't argued. Every evening after that, I sat alone in James's workshop, not crying anymore, just organizing. Service records, maintenance logs, business binders, all labeled in his careful handwriting, an old Army habit that never left him. One night, a sealed envelope slid out of a green binder and hit the floor. My name was written across the front in his unmistakable hand. I wasn't ready. I slid it back inside and carried everything into the house, telling myself nothing important should be opened after midnight. A few days later, I finally broke the seal. Inside were 3 full pages, remarkable for a man who'd rather fix a fence than talk about his feelings. "My darling Diane, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And knowing my mother, she's probably already making your life harder than it needs to be." I laughed out loud in that empty house. He wrote about ordinary things first, the furnace filter, his old truck, and then his tone shifted. I never walked into an operation without an exit plan already in place. Business isn't so different. Richard knows where the important papers live. Check the blue estate binder, not the green one. I found it buried on the bottom shelf of the workshop, coated in dust. Trust documents, corporate filings, legal correspondence going back years. I called Richard immediately. He sat at my dining table, turning page after page in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Diane," he finally said, "James didn't hide anything. He documented every bit of this exactly the way he was supposed to. Whitmore Precision may not even belong to the probate estate. Neither, I think, does your house." For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about the quiet, knowing smile James used to wear whenever someone underestimated him. The final probate hearing was set for a cold Tuesday morning. The courthouse hallway was packed. Neighbors, veterans from James's old post, half the staff from Whitmore Precision. Inside, Margaret looked dressed for an awards banquet, pearls and all. "I hope there are no hard feelings, Diane," she said. "There should have been fewer hard words," I answered. Her attorney, Gregory Combs, opened with confidence, talking about family legacy and bloodline. Richard's opening statement lasted less than 2 minutes. "We have no objection to the petition as it relates to any assets legally belonging to the probate estate." Confused glances rippled through the room. I signed page after page while Margaret sat back, comfortable, certain she'd already won. Then Judge Patricia Long closed the file, removed her glasses, and looked directly at Gregory. "Counselor, were you aware that Whitmore Precision Works was transferred into the Whitmore Legacy Trust 7 years ago? and that the residence on Marsh Hollow Lane was conveyed into that same trust? The room went silent. Gregory flipped frantically through his binders and found nothing. Your Honor, those documents were never presented in discovery. Richard stood calmly. They were recorded with the county in 2018. He handed the clerk a certified copy. The judge compared it to her own file and nodded once. They match. Margaret grabbed her attorney's sleeve. What is this? You told me everything was part of the estate. That's what the petition indicated, he said quietly. The judge turned to Margaret. This court cannot distribute property that is not legally owned by the estate. Her confident smile disappeared entirely. Richard explained the rest for the record. The trust had 3 co-trustees, myself, the shop's production manager Frank Doyle, and the Veterans Community Foundation of Coastal Georgia. Frank nearly fell out of his chair when he heard his own name. The trust required unanimous approval from all 3 before the business could ever be sold, dissolved, or relocated. And it came with conditions James had built in himself. The company had to remain in coastal Georgia, keep its veteran hiring program, and retain at least 80% of its employees through any ownership change. Margaret would receive a one-time distribution of $50,000, along with a private letter James had written explaining why. The judge read it in silence, then said only, Colonel Whitmore devoted a great deal of thought to making sure his family, his employees, and his community were all cared for after he was gone. Her gavel struck once. The claims on the company and the house were denied. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed Margaret with questions she had no answers for. One turned to me instead. Do you consider this a victory? I looked across the lot at Frank and the rest of the shop floor, waiting for me. I think my husband would be happy, I said. And your mother-in-law? I truly hope she finds peace. The following Monday, I walked back into Whitmore Precision for the first time since the hearing. The machines were humming again, the coffee was brewing, and Frank handed me a cardboard box from James's old office. Dozens of thank you notes he'd written over the years, and one envelope never mailed, addressed simply to whoever leads this company after me. Inside was a single sentence. Take care of the people, and the business will take care of itself. Winter came and went. Every Tuesday, Frank and I went over the numbers together in James's old office, and slowly I stopped feeling like an intruder behind his desk and started feeling like I was protecting what he'd built. By spring, we'd welcomed our first apprentices, veterans starting new chapters, the way James always believed people deserved to. A few weeks before Memorial Day, a letter arrived from Margaret. No lawyer, no demands, just a few lines. I spent so much time trying to hold on to what James owned that I forgot to appreciate who he was. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I folded it into the same blue binder that had changed everything. On Memorial Day morning, I brought fresh white roses to James's grave, knelt beside the stone, and finally said what I'd come to understand. You weren't protecting the money, you were protecting the people. The house was never just a house. The company was never just a company. They were places where lives had been built, where families found solid ground to stand on. And his greatest legacy was never measured in dollars, but in the people still standing because he'd cared enough to plan ahead. Walking back to the car, I realized I no longer wanted revenge. Justice had already finished its work. What remained now was peace, and peace turned out to be the greatest inheritance of all.